Did anybody have any comments on the minutes? Any discussion about them? Okay. Hearing none, then the minutes will be approved as handed out. And then we can move on to the chairman's report. I have some financial information. For April, the total amount spent was $1,700.05. And for May, it was $2,479.57, which leaves us with a remaining budget of $35,384.13. Does anybody have any questions or comments on that? Okay. The other part of the chairman's report is I'm still working on trying to get us county board representation. Have had a couple of conversations, sent a couple of letters, so I am still working on that. That is a work in progress. Hopefully we'll have somebody soon to join us as our county board representative. Okay. We can move on to old business. First is the youth focus group. We wanted to do a debrief after the presentation, but I know Julia had a meeting with Valerie after the presentation. So Julia, if you want to start with your notes on your meeting.
Yeah, so I met with Valerie McCall, who is the individual who kind of facilitates that Student Equity Advisory Council that Mila was a part of. And so we had a conversation about some next steps. And so she's very much willing to support any next steps, whether it be kind of using that Student Equity Advisory Council to bring representatives to like a youth advisory board for the Juvenile Justice Council. I know we've talked in the past of what that looks like, what the criteria is for youth to be involved on that youth advisory board. I also talked to her about, you know, maybe some potential like project specific ideas that we could collaborate with the Student Equity Advisory Council through West Aurora. So like, for instance, I was thinking and taking a look at our data, I would be curious to know what the youth perceptions are of the data, what they think might be going on, any reactions that they may have. It could also be just like roundtable discussions on a quarterly basis of like what's going on with youth, kind of bringing them together to have these discussions. So those are some of the ideas that were thrown out in my conversation with her, but ultimately she's very open to continuing the relationship. It's just a matter of what we want that relationship to look like. The other piece to it is that it is only one school district that they are representing, and it's very much dependent on the school district whether or not they have some sort of equivalent to this Student Equity Advisory Council if we were to start reaching out to other districts. But yeah, so that's kind of the gist of the conversation.
Does anybody have any comments or input on that? What did everyone think about the presentation, Maya's presentation?
I think it's a good place to start with maybe trying to tap into those student advisory boards. I don't know if Josh, if we can maybe, I don't know, brainstorm to at least try to get representation from at least the 3 areas of the county, because we're so big. Like if we can get West Aurora High School, a high school here in the central region, and a high school on the northern region that has some type of similar situated board, and see if maybe we can potentially get at least one representative from each area. I think we've been talking about trying to get youth involvement for the last 5-6 years. I've been, you know, heavily involved with this council, so I think it's time to at least try something. Like I said, the day of the presentation, I think she, you know, was eloquent, brave, you know, gave a perspective that I think as adults we need to hear and kind of listen to just where our kids are sitting. So.
Yeah, definitely.
So go ahead, Josh.
No, I think that's definitely something that's viable, especially once the fall things settle down a little bit. So almost thinking like winter period, you know, once we have the return to learning and school hopefully going back to normal. But no, I think that's a great idea. And I think the time is right to finally kind of institute some of those advisory councils. You know, we've been, as you said, Latanya, we've been talking about it for, gosh, 5-6 years now, it seems like.
And that's what I was going to say too. I totally agree. I think, you know, we've been talking about this for so long, and now we have a group that is willing and able. I think that we definitely should tap into this and try to utilize this resource. So Julie.
So I know that, sorry, I was just going to say, I know Mila had said that, I think Latanya, you had asked her directly, like, what's a way that we can get engagement from youth, or we can start, you know, interacting with youth. And she said to come to groups like this that she's a part of, like, that's one way to do it. And I guess I would also be curious, like, what the youth would say that they think a relationship with the council would look like. Like, is it just advising us on certain issues? Is it being a part of our meetings? What do they want involvement to look like?
Yeah.
Is there anything in, like, in juvenile justice council bylaws of how to select a student advisor? Or, because I know with school boards they'll have a student board member, but I'm not sure if juvenile justice councils are doing something like this around the state.
So part of our grant, we are charged with identifying a youth. I mean, it's been part of our grant for the past couple of years, but I think that the state, like the commission, struggles with getting a youth advisory board put together. So it's no wonder that we struggle at a local level. And so part of our grant is that we appoint a youth to go to the state level youth advisory board. And that hasn't really been addressed. It's just kind of like hanging out there by both the commission. It hasn't been addressed by them or us. But I thought that one of the criteria was some sort of connection to the juvenile justice system. I could be wrong. So we haven't at a local level, we haven't decided what it looks like.
So I can take a look at our bylaws and see if there's anything in there that would give us direction, or what we should do next.
That and probably the original grant request, because I think that language in there that you're talking about, Julia, might be there, because I think she might be right that it's either has to have some juvenile court contact, or either at risk or something, because remember, we've always talked about how do you do that and make sure we don't have a youth that's actively involved in the court system or could be involved in the court system. So I think it might be some language somewhere about that, because I know we've talked about that.
We
could potentially do it as a start, because it could be someone that advisory board would then kind of open us up to, because maybe it's someone within that board, maybe not the leader thereof, that might have had some contacts. You know what I mean? That's not necessarily, because I would say even if they've had like a station adjustment or something like that, that's contact with the system, even though they never even came to court services or court or anything. But I think we might need to check that language.
And I can, if that is the case with the language, I can also, we have a coordinator call next week. I can bring that up at the coordinator call to ask how they envision us kind of navigating the barriers that we've been up against with that involvement, and see what they say.
So it sounds like that what we need to do, have that conversation with the commission and check our bylaws, and then we can take a next step after that. Okay. Anybody else have any comment or question on that? Okay. I forgot one part of that. So I know that I think Julia had talked about before that the commission is looking for success stories. So Julia did pass along Mila's presentation to them as a success story for our council and for Mila as well. And they have invited us to present to the commission at the July meeting. Seems, Julia, do you want to comment on that? You had the discussion with them.
Yeah, they just reached out and asked us if we would be interested in doing that. So I need to circle back with Mila and Valerie and see if they're willing and available to do so. But I thought it was an exciting opportunity for Mila to be in front of additional stakeholders from around the state to speak her truth and share her story that she shared with all of us.
And I think she did a phenomenal job in front of us, so I'm sure that they will be equally impressed with her. All right, so on to next is the de-escalation videos. We have nothing new to report on those. And then law enforcement training. Julia has information on that for us.
Yeah, so I kind of figured it would just be easier to explain this. And I also want to, I don't know if it's worth sharing my screen, or let me just give the synopsis of what's happening. So Strategies for Youth had given us a matrix showing what their curriculum would address in relation to the standards or the mandates that are required of juvenile officers, but it was from 2019 mandates. So certainly things have changed since then. And so then I have been trying to track down a contact at the Illinois Law Enforcement Training and Standards Board, and finally was able to connect with somebody to give me some more information to get some movement. And so they gave me a matrix for the requirements for the SRO training. So my understanding is that in order for a training to count towards the SRO training requirements, it has to meet all of these standards that are listed in this matrix. And if it only meets, parts of it, then there's potential that other approved supplemental trainings can be used to fill in the gaps where it's missing some of the requirements. So I took that matrix and I asked Strategies for Youth to tell me which parts of their training meets the requirements that are included in the matrix for SROs. They gave it to me, and I from just looking at it, it looks like there's some gaps it doesn't look like there are some gaps, but I'm not sure if the gaps that are there are going to be, how do I want to say this? Like, based on the trainings that are available to, kind of broken down outside of the main SRO training, I don't know if they can fulfill those gaps that are left after we would do the Strategies for Youth training, if that makes sense. So the other piece to that too is when I talked to Strategies for Youth, they said that the funding the supplemental funding they had available is still available, but that we need to use it like now or we're not going to have access to it. So we're kind of in this position where we have to make a decision. And that's the information that I have. So I can pull up the matrix and kind of show you what I'm talking about. If, visually that would be helpful to everyone. Yeah, probably. Okay, so let me pull up the matrix that they sent me. Sorry, thought I had it. Okay. Okay, so this is the SRO basic curriculum matrix that Aletsy, the Illinois Law Enforcement Training and Standards Board, sent me. So any training that is put out there has to meet these requirements in order to fulfill the mandate by the state. So we already see that Strategies for Youth won't meet this part of it. They go through the history of juvenile law, but it looks like it's from the Supreme Court as opposed to, I'm not sure what the difference would be there. It doesn't go into some of the Juvenile Court Act, it looks like. So the highlighted pieces are what Strategies for Youth can cover. So if I'm scrolling too fast, let me know.
Julie, I was just going to say, as far as the Supreme Court, I assume that's the United States Supreme Court, or is it Illinois Supreme Court? Obviously, it should be both, but it doesn't say. Is that what your thought is as far as that question?
I assume it's United States only because this agency is out of Massachusetts. So
Okay.
I don't know how tailored they would be to the state of Illinois.
Okay. I really can't think off the top of my head that I know TLO versus New Jersey is used U.S. Supreme Court. I don't know. I know there was one out of Joliet. I don't know if it went to the Supreme Court. I can't think if there's a specific Illinois one, but just in regard to that, I assume it's United States as well. So.
Julia, did we lose you? Oh. And now you're muted, Julia.
Yeah, I got kicked out here, so let me share again. Okay, can you all see it?
Not right now.
No.
You're not sharing right now.
I'm not sharing right now?
No. Now you are.
Oh my goodness. I just stopped shared too. Okay, try again.
You're sharing right now.
Okay. So were you able to see any of what I was sharing outside of the Supreme Court pieces?
Yes.
Okay. So it looks like they go over the school structure hierarchy. They don't get into school law. They definitely talk about the adolescent development with teen brain. It's still kicking me out. What is happening? Let me connect to my hotspot and see if that helps, because I keep getting kicked out of Zoom. Sorry for this.
Julia, just while you're doing that, I don't know if you can hear me. So our question
I
is,
can
do
hear
we
you.
push forward now with all of these gaps, or try to find a way to fill these gaps in a very short period of time? Are those our two options?
I don't know that it's so much that we need to fill those gaps. The reality would be that if we offered this training, it would not fulfill the requirements that SROs are mandated to take. It would only fulfill part of them. So they would have to somehow make up for the rest of the gaps, or if we were able to offer the gaps, we have to get a curriculum that would be approved to do so.
And so if we present a program that is lacking some of the things that are required for them, there's the situation that they may choose not to do our training because they could get a training that fulfills all of the requirements.
Right. So the point was, and going back to Let's Be to see if this training curriculum would meet any of the standards, was to see if it would fulfill those requirements, so that we could help officers out and have a curriculum that was available in Kane County that would fulfill the requirements. So for SROs, it doesn't appear that it does. I did ask for a similar matrix for just juvenile officers, and they don't have one. Let's Be doesn't have one. And I've sent the matrix that Strategies for Youth sent me to Let's Be, but they're not really telling me whether or not it would be sufficient. So I don't really have confirmation that it would fulfill the requirements.
I don't think it makes a lot of sense to offer something that is not going to fulfill all of the requirements and ask people to sit twice or to have to make up that gap. That doesn't seem like a good idea to me.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And Eric may want to weigh in on this, but I just think that the officers are going to look for a training that fulfills all the requirements that they need.
Yeah, I just had 2 liaisons go to the we go to NEMR, which is Northeast Multi-Regional Training. That's a certification for the SRO. So I assume that their training had all what is needed as far as the SRO training with the law that was enacted a few years ago. I don't know if it's supplemental training. I mean, if my officer's already certified and they want to go to that as a supplement, I'm fine with that. Or, obviously they're kind of going over some things, but as a certification, I think Judge Park is right. We do have to be certified in the SRO class. And if this doesn't meet all that, I kind of agree that, we have to meet whatever standards we have to meet as far as our certification. If that doesn't meet it, then, why go to both?
Yeah. So, and the one through NEMR that would meet the requirements because that's our local training area or whatever that provides the police training. So we would still, that's like the next level, right? So like if we get this approved through a LETSB, then we would still have to go through NEMR to get the approval through NEMR for this training. And I think that was the question was, so it's not going to fulfill those requirements. So they're still going to have to attend that 40-hour SRO training. And then on top of it, now we have this would be an additional training. And so this is something that we've been up against, I feel like for a couple of years here, where there's a lot of mandates and a lot of requirements on officers, and we don't want to add an additional training to their plate if it's not going to be effective or useful.
So I think, so the next step then we would need to do an email vote to determine whether we want to just scrap this, correct?
Or if we want to move forward with it as a supplemental training to offer it, yeah. So,
okay.
And if we didn't, then I would be declining it.
Okay, so then there would be an email vote coming on it.
Yep.
Julia, can you send out what you were showing earlier?
Absolutely.
I have a hard copy of that. I just want to take a look at it.
Yeah, I'll send out both, the one that I was sharing and then the one that Strategies for Youth sent me. And I'll send that out for review and see if there's any additional thoughts, but.
Okay. Any further discussion on this topic? Okay, so we can move on. Parent engagement, we have nothing new to report. Then we're moving on to restorative practices.
Hey, Rochelle.
Yes.
Sorry, I said nothing new to report. I don't have anything new to report for parent engagement, but I did want to just say, I think that, so we had that collaboration with the Children's Mental Health Grant last fall, to try to start getting some engagement with parents. And we were starting with the probation officers. We had that focus group, and then we wanted our next step being maybe look at bringing in some parents for those conversations. So that's kind of it's still hanging in limbo. We haven't done anything with it. I think things with the pandemic this year kind of took over. I know that the Children's Mental Health Grant is really pushing forward with some efforts to engage parents. They have some parent cafes and that sort of thing going on. But in the coming year, I think that we definitely need to pick back up and figure out if we're awarded the grant, how we engage parents, just like we're trying to engage youth as well. Sorry.
Oh, you're good. You're good. Jump in. Okay. All right. Then I'm going to move on to restorative practices. So Julia and I had a discussion about the MOU and who has to sign it. So we decided to reach out to Civil at the State's Attorney's Office just to make sure that we were doing it correctly. Julia consulted with them, and we do need board approval for the chair to sign off on the memo of understanding. So just giving a heads up that there will be an email vote for that, specifically to give approval for me to sign the memo of understanding on behalf of the board. And then also in regards to restorative practices, we need to have a discussion about the books. Previously, we already got approval to take this out of the budget. We just need to determine how we are going to distribute these books and if we want criteria on who gets them, to get copies of them, if we want to offer them already to those who are currently attending. So we wanted to open it up for discussion to what everyone thought as to how we would distribute the books.
Can you remind us what the books are, please? Sorry.
That's okay. Julie, you want to jump in on this one?
Sure. The books are they're used as part of the training. So it's the Introduction to Restorative Practices is one book, and then one is Using Circles Effectively. So the material in the books coincides with the 2-day training that we're able to offer, but they can be purchased regardless through the International Institute of Restorative Practices for anyone's reading pleasure sort of thing. They don't have to go with the training, but the training definitely references the material that's included in them.
Is it the training that we were just talking about, not hitting all of the goals? Is that the training you're referencing? No.
Nope, the training is the restorative practices training. So we have 10 individuals who are actually, as of this week, going through the training of trainers to be licensed facilitators for the Introduction to Restorative Practices training. Those are the books that go with that training.
Julia, could you remind us all how many books or how much money do we have dedicated for the books?
So we have, the number is kind of a weird number, but we have 143 of each book. So what is that, 286 books that are $15 a piece. So just rounding it out, we have about 4,200 going towards these books, $42.75 and 70 cents to be exact. And then we also have additional books. I went over to the JJC to see the council's stockpile, and we have some additional books still there as well. I didn't count them, but we have a few boxes of each book. So there's 2 different books, and we already have some existing.
Does anyone have any recommendations as to how we should distribute the books? Do we, as Julia said, we have 10 people already doing it. We could just automatically give to those 10 people and then decide how we would distribute the rest.
I would say absolutely give it to the 10 that's currently in the training. And then we have other facilitators that was trained before this, or no?
Not that are active. Yeah, that was a concern. Yeah. And I will say too, as part of the MOU, they've all signed the MOU. And so that means they've all committed to doing a training for the community in the next year. So we should have 10 community trainings, but nobody has said where the money is going to come from to pay for those books for the community training.
So then since we have that stockpile, once they submit or let us know that they have scheduled this training, then we could supply books for the participants of that training, correct?
Yeah, we could.
I would think that's probably the best use of the books.
I agree.
So wait for a submission.
They need to let us know, I plan to host a training at this time on this date with this number of participants, and we supplied books, maybe with a couple of extra for that agency that is being hosted at, so that they can learn more about it. And that's how we distribute it. That would be my suggestion.
There's a lot of head shaking yes, so I think many agree with Latanya on that. Okay. Anything else on, any other comments or questions on restorative practices? Okay. Then
Sorry, I have something else. So with that, we also have the 10,000 cards that we purchased, the additional 10,000 cards that we purchased last year that need to be distributed. In fact, I got a request for some cards from a U46 school. Do we just want to just equally distribute like we did before?
I would say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Julia, were you talking about the law enforcement cards?
Nope, I was talking different cards. The restorative practices cards.
Okay, got you. Sorry. Okay, so we can move on to resource folder. Julia, I know you've done a lot of work on this, so do you want to talk about this?
Yes, so I presented the initial draft. The feedback was essentially to split them between juvenile delinquency and abuse and neglect. So I have an initial draft of the juvenile delinquency one that I just shared so far with Latanya and Pam, because I know that there was some questions about, there's some requirements that detention is required to provide following a youth release. And so we were trying to see if there was any crossover in the handout that we were putting together. There's some additional space that we can, why do I keep getting kicked out? Can you all still hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm connected by my phone, so that's the saving grace today. Kicking me out. So there's some additional space on the juvenile delinquency one, but I would like to send it out to the rest of the work group that was initially convened to see what feedback is, to see if there's additional information or if we just want to make the text larger. I know that we are also trying to keep it as simple as possible, but since we've separated them out, there may be opportunity to be more specific or targeted for each one. But that's kind of where we're at with it.
Anybody have questions, comments on that? Okay, then we're going to move on to racial and ethnic disparities. The red team is set to meet on June 18th. Julie, did you want to add anything to that?
No, we're just going to reconvene and continue our discussion.
And the individual meetings, Julia is still working on coordinating those. Other than that, we have nothing new to report on those. I'm going to move current expenditures. The first item was supposed to be a vote today, but we are not going to have a vote on that. We have found out that we could not move the funding at this point in the fiscal year. So we're going to need to table the vote. And hopefully we'll be able to make it work out of the fiscal year 2022 budget. Any questions on that? Okay, and then law enforcement cards. So Julia, we're just trying to figure out how many we need, correct?
Yeah, so what would need to happen is we need to determine how many we would need and if we want to pursue it this year or if we want to wait until next fiscal year pending our grant application, because we could, and I have to get confirmation on it. I'm working on getting confirmation on this, but there's a clause in our contract that we can move up to $1,000 within a line item. And so the line item that we'd be moving it in is the supplies line item that is allotted for the restorative practices books. So we'd end up reducing the number of restorative practices books that we'd be purchasing to purchase law enforcement cards. And so that's kind of there's two decisions. Do we want to pursue it this year? And if so, how many?
What is law enforcement card? What is that?
Those are, so Kristen had talked about receiving a request from a law enforcement agency, but they're the cards that have the SAS and CCBYS numbers on them. So it talks about like what criteria it would be for law enforcement officers to call SAS, or what criteria there would be for law enforcement officers to call CCBYS.
So you mentioned, so the money would be taken from the restorative practices books, but at this point, we have no training set up for the restorative practice anyway, correct?
Correct.
Could we do something like this? Like, what is the typical size of the restorative practice book training? Because I think you said you were talking about 246 books. If you did 10 books from training for each training, you're what, about 100 books? So maybe we reduce that so you can meet the need of both. Pay for the restorative practice books and still be able to get law enforcement cards. Because if I recall, those law enforcement cards, when we first printed those, were very well received. And we definitely want to have that information kind of on the streets, right? You know, at that initial interaction. So if we could just set a limit and let the people know that it'll be doing those 10 trainings, we will supply 10 books or whatever that number is, 15 or whatever that is. And then that gives us room to do both.
So they can have up to 45 in their training. Now, I don't know on Zoom, if they're doing them virtual, I would not recommend that they do 45 people. But it's going to be up to the facilitator's discretion and how many participants they can get. So they may only get 20 participants for a training, or 15 participants. I mean, that's still, you know, great to have. So we could do something like that. I will say cost-wise, the cards kind of range because it depends on like the promotions that are going on with the Vistaprint company that we ordered from before, but it's anywhere from like $800 to $900 for, I want to say it was around 2,500 of them, which is what we had ordered last time.
But those have lasted us a few years, right?
Yeah.
So maybe order less, and then out of the next fiscal year, we order more to have some on hand.
Yeah, we could do that too.
Latanya's on a problem-solving roll.
She is.
It really is.
Thank you, Latanya.
So how many do we think would be sufficient for this year, knowing that we purchased over 2,500 last time and distributed them out?
That was what, 3 or 4 years ago we ordered them?
Yeah, because I had to go way back and find the numbers. It was like 2018.
Can we order half?
Yeah, half or a third. Yeah. And then do it more frequently instead of all at once, like Latanya said.
Mm-hmm.
If you do it by a third, that's 833. You can maybe do 500 just to get us started, and then out of next fiscal year do the rest, or maybe do 750 to get you started.
Okay. So I can play with the numbers and play with the numbers of the books and see how many books we can get for our 10 trainings, and then maybe that can be our deciding amount, and then I'll propose it to the board in an email vote.
Anybody else have comments on that item? Okay, so then our last old item is fiscal 2022 grant. The grant was submitted, so we will just be waiting for feedback from them as to whether we get it or not. Anything on that? Okay, so we can move on to new business. Expungement, the first expungement packet updates. So I don't know if everyone knows, but the Illinois Supreme Court is coming down. There's a whole thing going on with standardized forms for everyone in the state to use. We have learned through Lisa that some of the forms in our expungement packet will now have standardized forms. So we will need to change those. The good news is that that does not go into effect until September. So we have some time to get those changed so that we have the standardized forms included. And so we'll be working on that, and then we'll get them redistributed to everyone so that by the time I think it's September 1st is the deadline, that they will all be in there and ready to go by then. Any questions?
I do have a question just for LaTanya on procedurally how it works with the expungement packets. I know in the email that Lisa sent out, she was saying that probation gives out the expungement packets to the kids. And I wondered at what point, at the beginning or at the end of the term of their probation?
Typically at the end.
Okay.
Because I mean, we give them to at the beginning.
It'll get lost. Yeah. I just wondered. That was my thinking.
And we still give them in back when we were in the offices, you find them in the parking lot and all that kind of stuff. But,
Yeah. Because we're not giving them out in court. Since I've been here, I haven't seen them. I know Lisa had mentioned that
they used to be on the bench and they were giving them out at sentencing. At one point, I can't remember which judge was on the bench at that time, but I remember there was a stat on the bench and they were giving them out at sentencing. I think that might have been.
We started that under Judge Hall.
Yeah.
So
We pretty much give them out every time we have an arrest at the beginning. I know it's a beginning process, but at least we can say that it's done.
it's done.
But I don't know if like
Aren't law enforcement required to?
yeah,
Is
yeah.
law enforcement required to give them out? Yeah.
Yeah,
I thought
yeah.
so.
So I guess I didn't know probation gave them out at the end, so they're getting them multiple times, but.
That's okay. Maybe they
Either way,
remember
either way.
one. So I don't think that, from just my quick view of it all, I don't think that any of the procedure is changing. It's just because in the packet, we give examples of forms for them or the motions that would need to be filed. And my quick look of it is it's just that. Those are going to be more standardized. Okay. So we can move on to our last item of new business, and that is our fiscal year 2022 meeting structure. So Julia wanted to open this up for discussion about meeting frequency and times. She had an idea to put out a survey to get feedback from everyone as to how they would like the meetings to work, the frequency and the times. But part of that is if we do that, just kind of wanted to know, should the survey just go out to board members or to all of our participants? And then I think, Julia, right now we don't have as this is the last meeting of this fiscal year, we don't have a July meeting date set. And so she is proposing that we set the next one for July 8th at noon, and hopefully that would be for us to discuss the grant that we will have received and discuss a strategy of going forward from there. So any thoughts, or would everyone just prefer that Julia puts out the survey and gets some ideas that way?
Would you do two separate surveys, one for the board of directors and then one for the quarterly meetings? Because you pretty much have a different set of people at those two meetings as far as providing input. Or are you talking about just one survey about both?
Well,
I could do either. Whatever the board prefers.
I think two surveys is a good idea if you can.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is everybody okay with going ahead and scheduling the one meeting for July, the July 8th meeting, so that we can discuss the grant? Are you okay with that? Okay, I'm seeing head shaking yes. Okay, so then we'll just have Julia put out the survey for us all to give feedback on how we would like the rest of the meetings to go for fiscal year 2022. That sound good, Julia?
Sounds good.
Okay, right. So then any other updates that anyone would like to talk about? Okay, then I guess, then we just need a motion and a second to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
I'll second.
Okay, and it is 12:47 and we are done. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.